morning, everybody, and how exciting to be together. I want to speak a few minutes about the broad context of the Sustainable Development Goals and the geopolitical and governance challenges around them so that we can have some thoughts about how to make some breakthroughs. Yesterday, I briefly tried to take the story from the year 700 to 2000, and so now I'll try to take the story from 2000 to today quite quickly. First, we're in a new economic world in that the North Atlantic world, which was the part of the world that industrialized roughly 100 years or 150 years ahead of the rest, now faces the catching up of the rest of the world. So there's a radical, rapid technological convergence taking place. That convergence is reaching even the poorest places of the world. When that technological convergence occurs, it shows up in the data as very rapid economic growth. China experienced economic growth of roughly 10% per year during the period 1980 to 2020. When you grow at 10% a year by the rule of 70, which I hope people know, divide 70 by the annual growth rate, and that tells you the doubling period. So if you are growing at 10% per year, 70 divided by 10 means a doubling rate of every 7 years. That means that in 35 years, you will have 5 doublings, or 2 to the 5th power. That means that the economy would expand 32 times in a 35-year period. That's what happened in China. The country went from poverty because of this century of disaster that I spoke briefly about yesterday to recovery at an astounding rate. And by around 2015, China had reached essentially the technological frontier in a number of different fields. China's now one of the 3 centers of frontier innovation, the others being Europe and the United States. So we have 3 centers of global innovation: the US, Europe, and Northeast Asia, China, Japan, Korea, together. And arguably, the Northeast Asian pole of innovation is the largest, actually, in the world today, bigger than the United States and Europe, but that's roughly 3 equivalent areas. Second, this has given rise to tremendous geopolitical tension because the rise of China has upended the Western or North Atlantic dominance in the world. And the United States is having a deep neurotic reaction to this. And it is a psychological as well as a geopolitical reaction. This was not expected at all. If you look at documents in 1990, 1995, 2000, even because they don't know how to do arithmetic very well in Washington, they did not know how to think about what the world would look like even 25 or 30 years ahead. In 1992, the US leaders realized, they thought that the US was the unipolar power completely unchallenged in all regions of the world. China wasn't even mentioned, and Russia was a has-been. And these assumptions were really flawed. There was a narrative in the US. I knew it, I objected to it all along, but the narrative was that China just copies, China can't innovate, China makes cheap goods, China will never really amount to anything. Paul Krugman wrote a paper that was widely circulated called The Myth of the East Asian Miracle. I wrote a book that year called Emerging Asia for the Asian Development Bank that said this is going to be a wonderful 25 years for Asia because Asia is rapidly converging in technologies. I was right, I have to say. This was not a myth. This was just part of a rebalancing historically. But it means strong geopolitical tensions. Sadly, because there's nothing intrinsically threatening about this. This is actually what we should want, which is the spread of prosperity and technology, but it's interpreted as an us versus them reaction. Economists generally have the mindset of win-win, and geostrategists generally have the mindset of win-lose, so that in a geostrategic mindset, someone else's progress is your relative loss, which is really a nasty way to look at the world, by the way, and one that is guaranteed to be destructive. And that's why the realists speak of the tragedy of great power politics. They admit that this is a tragedy. I want us to avoid the tragedy. We don't need tragedies. We actually need cooperation. The third dimension of all of this, which brings us here and brought us the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, is that the scale of global economic activity is now so great that we really have pushed the planet to deep instabilities on all fronts. And of course, our politicians and the political system are very slow to react to this. They're scientifically negligent, they are at the hands of special interests, and they were not trained to understand what's going on. I had one of the most terrifying jobs in the world for 15 years, heading an institute with climate scientists. That's a very frightening thing to do. I don't recommend it. Every day they come to you and tell you it's much worse than we thought. So for 15 years, these very, very intelligent scientists kept coming to me and explaining, Jeff, it's happening faster, it's worse than we thought, there are more dangers than we thought, there are more tipping points than we thought. Brilliant, soft-spoken people without any political agenda for 15 years terrified me. So I just want to try to terrify you just a little bit as well. Imagine James Hansen, one of the most brilliant climate scientists in the world, in my view, the lead climate scientist, a soft Midwest Iowa accent, whispering in your ear that the ice sheets are breaking up much faster than you think, and this will be a multi-meter sea level rise. And it's no joke, and the IPCC, he would tell me, is 5 or 10 years behind reality, because the IPCC is a consensus document, whereas Hansen is a leading scientist. Consensus lags the lead 5, 10, or 15 years. So I heard everything that we're hearing now 15 years ago. And I heard it from two gurus of science, how bad, and it's happening as they said. So I can tell you it's tracking what they told me 15 years ago. And they pointed out the consensus will get there, but there aren't enough published articles yet for the IPCC to regard this as a consensus, so they just don't understand yet. The ocean circulation is slowing. Biomes are being destroyed. Biodiversity is under massive, massive, rapid loss. The climate change is accelerating to around 0.36 degrees Celsius per decade, meaning that we're at 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial. In a decade, we'll be above 1.5 degrees pre-industrial on baseline. And what's going to happen is in the next few years, we'll exceed 1.5 degrees because we're in an El Nino event now, which is an interannual event in the Pacific Basin, which warms the Earth's temperature by 0.1 to 0.2 degrees C. We're coming out of a La Nina. We could be pushed above 1.5 degrees in the next 3 or 4 years because of the interannual events. But within 10 years, we will have breached the Paris limit with a very significant likelihood. So that's the environmental crisis. we're also in a period of technological upheaval. As you can see, basically, Ukraine is a place where everybody is trying their weapon systems right now. What's happening in the Ukraine war is that everybody's trying their new weapons. They're seeing how to digitize the weapons. They're seeing what kind of drones can work. This is a trial run for the big show. And this is why the US military is so enthusiastic about the war. It's actually a perfect war for the United States. No Americans that we know of are dying. Few are, but they don't get reported. But basically, the Ukrainians are doing the hard work, but US weapon systems are being tested. So this is technology, unfortunately, which is the weaponization of our technologies right now, especially digital and artificial intelligence. We've moved to a digitized weapons battlefield, and it's all of our major tech companies are part of the military-industrial complex now by design. They all have large contracts. They're all part of this show. And this is why there's also the technology war with China, stop the chips manufacturing and so forth. It's all extremely dangerous. So this is the context in which we're trying actually to do some nice things to end poverty and to get the environmental crisis under control. And I always refer to a statement of President Kennedy in his inaugural address on January 20th, 1961, which for me summarizes our real state of affairs. He said, "For the times are very different now. Mankind holds in his mortal hands the ability to end all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." And so this is the real paradox of modernity, which is that our technological systems are so advanced now that we could, in 10 or 20 years, end extreme poverty, or we could destroy everything. And who knows? It's that real. We are not in good control anywhere. I don't even know who really controls political decisions in the United States now. It's very unclear. Certainly, the military has a very significant role in the decision-making, not only in the implementation. I don't know how great. They don't let me into those decisions. But watching, I'm not at all convinced. What I know is that American generals would have blown up the world many times over had they had their way over the last 75 years, because I've studied rather closely American military doctrine and nuclear doctrine, and it's extremely dangerous, and they're utterly naive. Don't think they're very clever. They're not so clever. They're really not so clever. They're just maybe your B students, okay? And they become generals. And I don't even want my A students having nuclear weapons in their hands. I don't want my B students. The C students are now the rich people who run Wall Street. It's really quite a show. Now, what do we do about it? The best part of our world is that the vast majority of humanity would like to survive, would like to prosper, and would like to have peace. And the vast majority of the member states of the United Nations are aligned with that view. There are not very many superpowers. There's the US, and there's China, and arguably, and Russia, I would say for sure, as a nuclear superpower. And not so many others. There are some important regional powers, of course. India, you might put in that front list. The world depends on the major powers not having conflict. That's what our survival depends on. And our survival depends on actually the world's major powers saying, you know, we have so many other things to deal with, we should really put aside some of these other issues. And Deng Xiaoping was extremely smart to say, Taiwan, that's for another generation. Okay, I would say that's still for another generation. Let's try to keep things calm. Let's try not to create a porcupine Taiwan so militarized that's bound to lead to war, by the way. That's how the Americans think. If we can just militarize Ukraine enough, that'll deter. Come on, that'll create war, guaranteed. That's why they got a B at best in the class, because they did not understand real strategy. So we need to be very careful, and we need to understand how to cooperate globally, and especially US, China, Europe, Russia, India, as absolutely all together. You cannot wipe out Russia from the map. European leaders want to close their eyes, wish 3 times, and Europe and Russia will disappear from the map. If Russia disappears from the map, we all disappear from the map. That is 11 time zones, 1,700 deployed strategic nuclear weapons, another 2,500 tactical nuclear weapons. There's no Russia disappearing from the map, except in the fairy tales of US generals. So we need Russia as a cooperative partner. Partner, real partner. And by the way, I've advised several Russian governments they could be absolute regular partners. But the US was never able to take yes for an answer. If Gorbachev said we disband the Warsaw Pact, the US said, oh, we get it, we'll expand NATO to all your countries. No, that's not what we meant. Oh, we get it, we'll expand NATO to all your countries. That's the problem of not being able to take yes for an answer. So, what do we need to do now? We really easily have the capacity to end poverty. You end poverty the way that China did it, which is 40 years of hard work, a lot of saving, putting your kids through school. This is the most important single step of ending poverty. Keeping the economy open, and then poverty will end. And that's true of Africa. And that Africa should follow the Chinese strategy. As a unified Africa, it's the same size as China, and it could have 10% growth per year for the next 40 years, actually. And China can help fund that with the Belt and Road Initiative and with other financing, but it should be done in partnership with the whole world. That's the SDG idea. So just to conclude, what is really, why did the world agree on these goals, and what is really necessary to move them forward? The world agreed in 2015 on the Sustainable Development Goals and on the Paris Agreement because these goals are actually truly important for every country in the world. We will not have stability, we will not have peace, we will not have physical security of Earth systems unless we actually do this agenda. They're not nice things to do. They are necessary things to do. This is pretty well understood in most of the world, actually, because if you don't have the distractions of being a great power, you do have the focus of knowing that you're in trouble. And that is what most of the world feels right now, that it's changing so fast, it's so dangerous. I got up this morning at 5 a.m. to speak to a very small country, feeling that it's caught between U.S.-China politics right now. So they wanted to talk about how to survive in the middle of great power politics. So this 2015 agenda is actually the real agenda. It's not going to go away. It's only going to intensify purpose and in importance. Ukraine, NATO enlargement, Taiwan, these are non-issues compared to the issues we face in reality. And we should stop provoking each other over issues that are not central to human well-being, period. And this is absolutely the basic point. When the 2015 agenda was set, the U.S.-China relations were entering a period of steep decline. And the decline came because the U.S. policymakers panicked at China's rise, starting around 2014. Two initiatives in China startled America. One was the Made in China 2025 program, which could have been phrased better, actually. But China announced, we will lead in 10 technologies. And the document was read in the United States as, we will dominate in 10 technologies. And if China had just said, we will aim to improve in 10 technologies, we would have avoided a lot of conflict. So I think the document was really overstated in a way that raised panic. The second was the Belt and Road Initiative, because China was doing what the United States had done 40 years before, which was with vast wealth and high technology, it had gone out to build an infrastructure that would also support this vast Chinese economy. I'm completely in favor of the Belt and Road Initiative, by the way, because it builds the infrastructure that we need for ASEAN, for Africa, and it really does. When China does something, it builds these things. The US talks about it. Wouldn't it be nice to have a power system? With China, you get a power system. It's a big difference. But this also panicked the United States. So these two events changed US diplomacy in 2015 to a kind of panic almost. And I now understand better. It was then that US foreign policy decided we must contain China's rise. And some of this now can be traced to documents written in those years very clearly. And so the US started really crazy things like creating trade groups in Asia that didn't include China. You have to be mad to aim for this. We're going to have a TPP, it's going to be Trans-Pacific, but not China. I look at a map, China's there every time I look at the map. In fact, it's the main trade partner of every one of the countries. So how can you make a trade system without it? But this, honestly, it's like children. Like, I'm going to have my 7th grade party and I'm not inviting that person. It's really at that level, actually. That's how they think. Okay, this is where we need to absolutely overcome this kind of simplistic, simple-minded mentality. I don't know quite how to do it, because in the US, I don't talk to too many generals and they don't talk to me, and they may be the ones really running the show right now. So the politicians have almost no say in this except they're told what to do. And they don't have passports, so they don't know also. So this is really a serious problem. Now, in terms of the economics of this, the basic economics of development, as we were talking about in the past 2 days, is finance. Because the core of development is investment. The core of China's success is a massive education of a young generation. The most rapid advance in education in history. Unbelievable. how many years of schooling, quality of research output in a 25-year period, unprecedented in history. So that's the basis. But then 15,000 kilometers of fast rail, 15,000 kilometers of intercity highway, power, 5G. That's all the investment that lifts up this massive economy. If you did the same in Africa, Africa would have the same outcome. Massive education, plus electrification, plus rapid intercity rail, plus these other investments, we would be done with poverty on this planet. And the costs of that are, as we've been discussing, $1 trillion a year, perhaps. Not very much in a $100 trillion economy. China's economy right now is about 18 trillion at international prices. Actually, even larger than that, sorry, at international prices. The US economy is $25 trillion at market prices. This could be done if there was a will to do it. There is no real will to do it in Europe's obsessed with its internal questions and with its security, which it's misunderstood. The US is obsessed with being number one. China, I believe, is ready to do a lot for the rest of the world, actually, because it fits China's phase of history as well as mentality and approach to the world. But if we could get everybody together behind this agenda, it would be absolutely wonderful. One of my hopes in this, by the way, is something very particular to China's neighborhood, which is that one of the most important developments that could take place economically and politically and geopolitically would be cooperation between China, Japan, and Korea, because that's something within reach. Northeast Asia would be the center of the world economy if that happened, by the way, which would be terrific. It would be absolutely dynamic. It would help China's finishing touches on development tremendously, and the results for the world would be tremendous. The US works overtime to make sure that Japan and Korea are on the other side of the divide. I think Chinese diplomacy sometimes doesn't help this process, actually, because I think China underestimates how much benefit there would be of a unified Northeast Asia. That's my own view. I think China would be a huge beneficiary of that, and that requires a lot of soft diplomacy, cooperation, and so on. But I'll just end here by saying that the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement are not the hardest part of our story. They require a massive investment effort. They require a focus over a 30-year period, no doubt. They require especially peace and cooperation, and our politicians understanding that investing in our future is a lot better than investing in a new arms race or in geopolitical conflict. And the simplest way to see this was noted by Isaiah in 800 BC, when he noted that you really could turn the spears into pruning hooks and the swords into plowshares. This was a very good idea. Quantitatively today, the arms race, at a minimum, at narrow count, costs $2.2 trillion a year, of which the United States is $900 billion, 40% of the total. If we directed even a fraction of that to the Sustainable Development Goals and the energy transformation, we would get it done. Pope Paul VI had the idea of this in Popolorum Progressio in 1967, directly saying use your arms spending for development. Popolorum Progressio is the greatest document of development up to Laudato Si, because Laudato Si made it sustainable development. So it's a kind of progression of thought. But the idea that we can afford this, and the real way to afford this is to turn from conflict to cooperation, is the basic truth. And it's quantitatively the truth. And if we could find that level of understanding, we'd actually solve these problems. Thank you.